Hello. Hi. Happy Friday. How you doing? How's your... Oh, hi, Sharkies. How's your week? How's your Friday? Are you glad to make it to the weekend? Friday. Oh boy. Long week, but today was adequate. Only adequate? Oh. Yes, the weather was very nice. Um, I actually wore a t-shirt while sitting in the car for a while. Took the pupper for a walk around the park, where he had a couple of encounters with other puppers. I am a little sleepy today. I slept in a little bit later than I wanted to. Oh, I just noticed that this glass has a crack in it, going down, just like straight down one edge. Oh, and then a little bit of, I think this glass may need to get retired. It's just a glass. They're replaceable. So, anything fun planned? Or was that, oh, that awe was probably for Farmos, not the glass. I feel like I do that a lot on the stream, the whole misinterpreting what a message is directed towards. It's not the first glass Farmos has noticed lately. Yeah, maybe we need to purge out some of our cupboard space and replace some of our damaged glasses and things. I do like the square glasses, the taller and glasses that we've got. I like that set. They look nice. And it's hard to know. Oh, what I'm, um, what messages are we responding to. Yeah, maybe. It's not that important. Working on some D&D stuff involving some puppet making. Reading kids Lord of the Rings. So you're starting into Lord of the Rings. That's exciting. Have you already started it? Because last I recall, you were reading Harry Potter. Been seeing a lot of Lord of the Rings memes and things recently. Started reading it a couple weeks ago. Wow, so you must be almost finished describing a tree. Ah. The last time I tried to read Lord of the Rings, um, which I've read it before, but the last time I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it this time. Um, yeah, there's that description of the Shire and of like a tree that lasts for pages at the beginning, and I can't skip that. Like I can't skip anything in a book. I've got to start at the beginning and read everything. And I just couldn't get past that description of the tree. I don't know. It bogged down, and it was probably just something to do with the space I was in at the time or something like that. But I was like, nope, moving on. And I didn't end up reading through it at that point. Haven't quite had the momentum that you had when you read The Hobbit. Yeah. I mean, it gets more interesting as it goes on and everything, and like I know that, and I do want to reread it at some point, but I don't know, that tree in the beginning. So, speaking of books getting more interesting, how's that for a transition? We had some interesting stuff in the last chapter, in chapter 10. Garion got out with the whole Murgo plot quite quickly, huh? There wasn't a lot of beating around the bush with that. They did some magic and got into Vo Ebor, and they marched into King Corodulin's court. And then Mr. Wolf had a conversation with Corodulin, while Aunt Pole had some kind of conversation with Queen Maya Serana. And then Garion felt that it was time, that he needed to get out with the whole plot thing. And it kind of felt, I don't know, it felt a little bit like it wasn't 100% in Garion's full control. Right? Like, he knew that he needed to do what he did, but it felt like he also somehow knew that he had to do it right then and there. And it wasn't entirely clear where those feelings were coming from. Right? Like, he kind of, it felt like it was slightly out of his hands. Does that make sense? Did it feel that way to everyone else? So we'll see with chapter 11. Pharma says, yeah, kind of. Like, it could have been just a feeling, but that it was a bit intense for it to be just his. Just his feeling? Is that what you mean? Like it was from someone else who knew more than he did or something. I mean, of course, Farmos and I have read these books before, but just based on chapter 10, that's kind of, I think, how that feels. Based on, and I mean, I'm saying that as though this is me speculating, but Garion basically kind of was thinking as much. Garion said urgently, without knowing exactly why, he knew that it was time to speak. Natchak must not be allowed to leave the throne room. The faceless players, who before he kind of spoke of as like speculation, like it felt like pieces on a board, like he was a piece on a board. But here it almost feels like it's almost not speculation anymore. The faceless players had made their final moves, and the game must end here. And then there was the bit where, it's important, grandfather, very important. Mr. Wolf turned as if to reply sharply, but then he seemed to see something that no one else in the throne room could see, and his eyes widened in momentary amazement. What do you think that's about? Sharkies feel like a spectator. Oh, I feel like a spectator. That's a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern quote, right? Or am I misplacing that? Is that not a quote at all? I need to reread that play because parts of it are fading a little bit. Not like just the minor details, some of the minor like specific lines and things I want to refresh myself on. You're not sure if you got it right? Yeah. Same thing, right? Maybe you need to reread it too. I wonder if I've still got a script somewhere for it. We've got like dozens of copies of our script from the Three Musketeers just sitting in a box because it was like kind of complicated when because we had to get the rights to do that play, and then there was a bunch of caveats that came with that. You know, we weren't allowed to record it or like publish it or anything like that. Like it was just for our performance kind of thing. And then we had to buy our scripts from them, but they sent us way too many copies of the script. Like we needed like a dozen or 20 copies, and they sent us like 50 or more, something like that. Yeah, like Farmo says, like twice what we ordered. And so we were just kind of like, all right, anybody need extra copies of the script? Like, in case, do you need a backup in case you lose one? And then in the end, we just ended up like, okay, we've got all these extra copies. And they're nice. Like, you know, they're actually bound copies. Like, they're like little paperback books. With like a little bit of cover art and everything. And so we've just got all these extra copies of the Three Musketeers stage play. And yeah, we don't know. It feels like a shame to throw them away, but we can't really do anything else with them. At least they don't take up too much space because, you know, they're scripts. They're not like massive. You have a box of over 900 plastic sporks that are leftovers from a play over 10 years ago. Wow. That's... I mean, at least you could... I don't know, you could donate those to a food shelter or something. Or a food shelter. A food bank or something, maybe? I don't know. At least there's a use for plastic sporks. Like... You can take them to picnics, things like that, right? Like you can actually use them. As Farmo says, to use them for picnics. Oh, Sharky say, we figure we'll find a use for them one day, so we can't bear to part with them. Needed about 25, but the cheapest option was to buy 1,000 from a restaurant supplier. That's a bit extreme. Oh boy. One thing that I am a little sad about is at some point Farmos and I found a DVD copy, or Farmos found, and I think got for me, a DVD copy of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, our dad, I'm blanking on the names, but you know the version. You've seen it, right? Tim Roth, and you got the box of sporks for less than $8. Oh, fair enough. We watched it with you. Oh yeah. Anyways, we had that copy, and I have no idea where it's gone. And that's not an easy film to find. I have since found that it is not easy to find. Yeah, math. So it's a little sad that I don't know where it is. I'm sure it's probably in a box somewhere or something, but just no idea where. So that's unfortunate. I would like to know where it is. Well, it's officially 7:15. Why don't we get into chapter 11? Um, so, Sharky say 5 years ago we went to a video recording of a London stage production with Daniel Radcliffe. Another actor you didn't recognize from anything else. Went to a video recording, like, as in you saw it in a like you saw it on screen in a theater, or you saw them doing the stage production while they were recording it, or is it something else? Also, that sentence construction, 5 years ago, a couple of years ago. Well, which is it? I feel like it's probably 5 because that's more specific. Or is it both? And that 5 years... No, that can't be right. 5 years ago, you went to a recording that was recorded a couple of years ago. You actually went to a recording from the future. It was one of the official recordings of Britain's National Theatre, but broadcast cinema. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've seen ads for those. That's neat. I haven't actually gone to any of them, any of that kind of thing, but I've seen, like, when I've been to the theater, you know, they'll have little mini posters up that they are doing things like that. Yeah, so chapter 10 ended just with Hetar killing Nachak. So we were kind of just almost like just at the very end of the action, but like we were, you know, they didn't leave where they were or anything like that. Where we left off, they were still, you know, in the bloody massacre scene inside the king's court. Chucky say it was pretty good. Some different takes on the lines. Favorite moment still from when we did. Oh, was this of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? I was not certain. I didn't make that connection. That's neat. Your favorite moment is from when we did it. Do you mean like a specific part in the play that stood out? Radcliffe played Rose. I always need to take a moment. Okay. So when we did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I was Guildenstern. Right? Yes. And the only way I ever remember that is because before we did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I was in Hamlet as Rosencrantz. And I remember that because Elora played Guildenstern and called me Rosie. And so then I remember that. I remember her calling me Rosie, and then I go, okay, and then I swap that to Guildenstern when we did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Otherwise, I would have no idea who I played. That's the only way. I go through that little mental calculation every time I try to remember who I was in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Every single time. Which is, you know, fitting, I feel like. Mr. was in Hamlet as Horatio, but also played a scene from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern as Guildenstern. Horatio's a good part. He's a neat character. Like, the only person who survives. It gets appropriately confusing, yeah. All right. I'm gonna read this book. So we're on chapter 11, page 129 out of 322. and it is 9 pages long. A little less than, but 8, almost actually like 8 pages long, based on the fact that, you know, there's this much blank space here, and then the last page takes up about that much space, so it's more like 8 pages. But it runs until page 138. And I think we're still in media res here. So let's get into it. Chapter 11. A moment of dreadful silence filled the throne room following the death of Nachak. Picking up right where we left off. Then the 2 members of his bodyguard, who were still on their feet, threw their weapons down on the blood-spattered floor with a sudden clatter. Mandaralin raised his visor and turned toward the throne. "Sire," he said respectfully, "the treachery of Nachak stands proved by reason of this trial at arms." "Truly," the king agreed, "my only regret is that thy enthusiasm in pursuing this cause hath deprived us of the opportunity to probe more deeply into the full extent of Nachak's duplicity." "I expect that the plots he hatched will dry up once word of what happened here gets around," Mr. Wolf observed. "Perhaps so," the king acknowledged. "I would have pursued the matter further, however. I would know if this villainy was Nachak's own, or if I must look beyond him to Tower Urgas himself." That's a good point. He frowned thoughtfully, then shook his head as if to put certain dark speculations aside. "Arendia stands in thy debt, ancient Belgarath. This brave company of thine hath forestalled the renewal of a war best forgotten." He looked sadly at the blood-smeared floor and the bodies littering it. "My throne room hath become as a battlefield. The curse of Arendia extends even here." He sighed. "Have it cleansed," he ordered shortly, and turned his head so that he would not have to watch the grim business of cleaning up. Pharma says he's a pretty shrewd king. The other ones have been smart enough, but this one seems more so. He's definitely... He hasn't made any obvious mistakes that we've seen so far, right? Like, he has immediately listened to Belgarath and more or less believed Garion about what was going on, you know. Seen that what Garion was describing was too precise to just be made up. Pharma says he seems thoughtful and competent. The nobles and ladies began to buzz as the dead were removed, and the polished stone floor was quickly mopped to remove the pools of sticky blood. "Good fight," Barak commented as he carefully wiped his axe blade. Barak does appreciate a good fight. "I am in thy debt, Lord Barak," Mandaralin said gravely. "Thy aid was fortuitous." Barak shrugged. "It seemed appropriate." Hatar rejoined them, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "You did a nice job on Nachak," Barak complimented him. "I've had a lot of practice," Hatar answered. "Murgos always seem to make that same mistake when they get into a fight. I think there's a gap in their training somewhere." "That's a shame, isn't it?" Barak suggested, with vast insincerity. Armos says that the king was like, "Okay, Belgarath has to talk to me privately, let's go." rather than, no, no, we can totally stand on ceremony, like a lot of his kinsmen might have. Yeah. Garion moved away from them. Although he knew it was irrational, he nevertheless felt a keen sense of personal responsibility for the carnage he had just witnessed. The blood and violent death had come about as the result of his words. Had he not spoken, men who were now dead would still be alive. No matter how justified, how necessary his speaking out had been, he still suffered the pangs of guilt. He did not, at the moment, trust himself to speak with his friends. More than anything, he wished that he could talk with Aunt Pole, but she had not yet returned to the throne room, and so he was left to wrestle alone with his wounded conscience. Sharky is wondering if nobles and ladies beginning to buzz is supposed to compare them to flies. They're like flies, as naturally done in court to clean hide the evidence of conflict. I'm not sure. Nobles and ladies began to buzz as the dead were removed. Maybe. So let's see. He was left to wrestle alone with his wounded conscience. He reached one of the embrasures. I feel like I'm emphasizing that word wrong, but this is also kind of casting them in a sort of pest light, like they're not super useful in this circumstance. Yeah, they didn't do much except for scream and scramble to get out of the way during the fight. I don't think you're supposed to be very impressed with the courtiers in this scene. He reached one of the embrasures formed by the buttresses along the south wall of the throne room, and stood alone in somber reflection, until a girl, perhaps 2 years older than he, glided across the floor toward him, her stiff crimson brocade gown rustling. The girl's hair was dark, even black, and her skin was creamy. Her bodice was cut quite low, and Garion found some difficulty in finding a safe place for his eyes as she bore down on him. Face, Garion. The safe place is up here. It's easy. I would add my thanks to the thanks of all Arendia, Lord Garion, she breathed at him. Her voice was vibrant with all kinds of emotions, none of which Garion understood. Thy timely revelation of the Murgo's plotting hath in truth saved the life of our sovereign. Garion felt a certain warmth at that. He's getting praised. Oh. I didn't do all that much, my lady, he replied with a somewhat insincere attempt at modesty. My friends did all the fighting. But it was thy brave denunciation which uncovered the foul plot, she persisted, and virgins will sing of the nobility with which thou protected the identity of thy nameless and misguided friend. Virgin was not a word with which Garion was prepared to deal. He blushed and floundered helplessly. The Arryns do seem to have a certain preoccupation with, like, how much attention virgins will pay to things. This is not the first time a phrase like this has been used about like virgins are gonna think about this story. I guess it's very important what kind of opinion virgins have on current events. Feels like, you know, like the doomsday clock, you know, where like we're 8 minutes from midnight kind of thing. Or like, you know, here's the public opinion meter or something like that. Like you can tell how important or how maybe well known and well thought of something is in Arendia based on the virgin meter. You know, this many virgins are crying themselves to sleep over this at night. If it's further over, then it must be really sad and well known. Marmos says 4 out of 5 virgins agree. He blushed and floundered helplessly. Art thou, in truth, noble Garion, the grandson of eternal Belgarath? The relationship is a bit more distant. We simplify it for the sake of convenience. But thou art in his direct line? She persisted, her violet eyes glowing. He tells me I am. Is the Lady Polgara perchance thy mother? My aunt? A close kinship nonetheless, she approved warmly, her hand coming to rest lightly on his wrist. Thy blood, Lord Garion, is the noblest in the world. Tell me, art thou perchance as yet unbetrothed? Straight to the point. Garion blinked at her, his eyes growing suddenly redder. Ah, Garion! Mandoralin boomed in his hearty voice, striding into the awkward moment. Hooray, Mandoralin to the rescue! I had been seeking thee. Wilt thou excuse us, Countess? The young lady shot Mandoralin a look filled with sheer venom, but the knight's firm hand was already drawing Garion away. Sharky say red eyes. His vision is going red. He doesn't know what to do. There's too much. It's overwhelming. We will speak again, Lord Garion, she called after him. Sounds like a threat. I hope so, my lady, Garion replied back over his shoulder. Then he and Mandoralin merged with the crowd of courtiers near the center of the throne room. Red, your copy says ears? Oh, yeah, my copy says ears too. I read it as, I think, let me see. No, the other line about eyes was much earlier. Yeah, I just misread it. Read his ears growing suddenly redder, not eyes. That's just my bad. Then he and Mandoralin merged with the crowd of courtiers near the center of the throne room. I wanted to thank you, Mandoralin, Garion said finally, struggling with it a little. For what, lad? You knew whom I was protecting when I told the king about Nachak, didn't you? Naturally, the knight replied in a rather offhand way. You could have told the king. Actually, it was your duty to tell him, wasn't it? But thou hadst given thy pledge. You hadn't, though. Thou art my companion, lad. Thy pledge is as binding upon me as it is upon thee. Didst thou not know that? Garion was startled by Mandoralin's words. The exquisite involvement of Arendish ethics were beyond his grasp. So you fought for me instead? Mandoralin laughed easily.
Of course, he answered, though I must confess to thee, in all honesty, Geryon, that my eagerness to stand as thy champion grew not entirely out of friendship. In truth, I found the Murgo Nachak offensive, and liked not the cold arrogance of his hirelings. I was inclined toward battle before thy need of championing presented itself. Perhaps it is I who should thank thee for providing the opportunity.
I don't understand you at all, Manderalin, Geryon admitted. Sometimes I think you're the most complicated man I've ever met.
I? Manderalin seemed amazed. I am the simplest of men.
He looked around then, and leaned slightly toward Geryon.
I must advise thee to have a care in thy speech with the Countess Vazrana, he warned. It was that which impelled me to draw thee aside.
Who?
The comely young lady with whom thou wert speaking. She considers herself the greatest beauty in the kingdom, and is seeking a husband worthy of her.
Husband? Geryon responded in a faltering voice.
Thou art fair game, lad. Thy blood is noble beyond measure by reason of thy kinship to Belgarath. Thou wouldst be a great prize for the Countess.
Husband? Geryon quavered again, his knees beginning to tremble. Me?
I know not how things stand in misty Sandaria, Manderalin declared, but in Arendia thou art of marriageable age. Guard well thy speech, lad. The most innocent remark can be viewed as a promise, should a noble choose to take it so.
Geryon swallowed hard and looked around apprehensively. After that, he did his best to hide. His nerves, he felt, were not up to any more shocks. Sharky say, I also just wanted to stab someone. Farmo says, Countess wants a trophy husband. Sharky say, or upward mobility. Upward nobility, says Farmos. Nice. Yeah. So he was hiding. The Countess Vazrana, however, proved to be a skilled huntress. Uh-oh. With appalling determination, she tracked him down and pinned him in another embrasure. With smoldering eyes and heaving bosom. Oh, boy. Now, perchance, we may continue our most interesting discussion, Lord Geryon. She purred at him. Apparently it's that kind of chapter. Geryon was considering flight when Aunt Pole, oh, y'all ready for this? Accompanied by a now radiant Queen Maya Sarana, re-entered the throne room. Manderalin spoke briefly to her, and she immediately crossed to the spot where the violet-eyed Countess held Geryon captive. Geryon, dear, she said as she approached, it's time for your medicine. Medicine? He replied, confused. A most forgetful boy, she told the Countess. Probably it was all the excitement, but he knows that if he doesn't take the potion every 3 hours, the madness will return. Madness? The Countess Vazrana repeated sharply. Sharky say this author doesn't seem to have a great grasp / opinion of young women. We'll see. He doesn't, I mean, this is definitely someone trying to secure their future, I suppose. but we'll see whether this continues throughout. The curse of his family, Aunt Pole sighed. They all have it, all the male children. The potion works for a while, but of course it's only temporary. We'll have to find some patient and self-sacrificing lady soon, so that he can marry and father children before his brains begin to soften. After that, his poor wife will be doomed to spend the rest of her days caring for him. She looked critically at the young countess. I wonder, she said, could it be possible that you are as yet unbetrothed? You appear to be of a suitable age. She reached out and briefly took hold of Vazrana's rounded arm. Nice and strong, she said approvingly. I'll speak to my father, Lord Belgarath, about this immediately. The countess began to back away, her eyes wide. Come back, Aunt Pole told her. His fits won't start for several minutes yet. The girl fled. Can't you ever stay out of trouble? Aunt Pole demanded of Garion, leading him firmly away. But I didn't say anything, he objected. Manderalin joined them, grinning broadly. I perceive that thou hast routed our predatory countess, my lady. I should have thought she would prove more persistent. I gave her something to worry about. It dampened her enthusiasm for matrimony. What matter didst thou discuss with our queen? He asked. I have not seen her smile so in years. Maya Serana's had a problem of a female nature. I don't think you'd understand. Her inability to carry a child to term? Don't errands have anything better to do than gossip about things that don't concern them? Why don't you go find another fight instead of asking intimate questions? The matter is of great concern to us all, my lady, Manderalin apologized. If our queen does not produce an heir to the throne, we stand in danger of dynastic war. All Arendia could go up in flames. There aren't going to be any flames, Manderalin. Fortunately, I arrived in time, though it was very close. You'll have a crown prince before winter. Is it possible? Would you like all the details? She asked pointedly. I've noticed that men usually prefer not to know about the exact mechanics involved in childbearing. Manderalin's face slowly flushed. I will accept thy assurances, Lady Polgara, he replied quickly. I'm so glad. I must inform the king, he declared. You must mind your own business, Sir Manderalin. The queen will tell Corodulin what he needs to know. Why don't you go clean off your armor? You look as if you just walked through a slaughterhouse. He bowed, still blushing, and moved away. Men, she said to his retreating back. Then she turned back to Garion. I hear that you've been busy. I had to warn the king, he replied. You seem to have an absolute genius for getting mixed up in this sort of thing. Why didn't you tell me, or your grandfather? I promised that I wouldn't say anything. Garion, she said firmly, under our present circumstances, secrets are very dangerous. You knew that when you knew that what Leldorin told you was important, didn't you?
I didn't say it was Leldorin. She gave him a withering look. Garion, dear, she told him bluntly, don't ever make the mistake of thinking that I'm stupid. I didn't, he floundered. I wasn't. I... Aunt Pole, I gave them my word that I wouldn't tell anybody. She sighed. We've got to get you out of Arendia, she declared. The place seems to be affecting your good sense. The next time you feel the urge to make one of these startling public announcements, talk it over with me first, all right? Yes, ma'am, he mumbled, embarrassed. Oh, Garion, what am I ever going to do with you? Then she laughed fondly and put her arm about his shoulder, and everything was all right again. I feel like that exchange right there has happened 3 or 4 times at this point. The evening passed uneventfully after that. That's good. The banquet was tedious, and the toasts afterward interminable, as each Arendish noble arose in turn to salute Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole with flowery and formal speeches. They went to bed late, and Garion slept fitfully, troubled by nightmares of the hot-eyed Countess pursuing him through endless, flower-strewn corridors. They were up early the next morning, and after breakfast, Aunt Pole and Mr. Wolf spoke privately with the King and Queen again. Garion, still nervous about his encounter with the Countess Vasrana, stayed close to Manderalin. Sharky's asking if there was ham. Pharma says, what kind of banquet do you think it was? Of course there was ham. I don't know. The Arends seem to take pride in hunted game. So I would expect venison, maybe. Although it is a royal court, so maybe not. Maybe it's ham. Wild boar was Cherek. Leldorin seemed kind of unfamiliar with how you go about hunting a boar. Garion, still nervous about his encounter with the Countess Vasrana, stayed close to Manderalin. The Mimbrate Knight seemed best equipped to help him avoid any more such adventures. They waited in an antechamber to the throne room, and Manderalin, in his blue surcoat, explained at length an intricate tapestry which covered one entire wall. Plus it was the other dudes would start with A, the Asturian. The Asturian Arends, not the Mimbrates. About mid-morning, Sir Andorig, the dark-haired knight Mr. Wolf had ordered to spend his days caring for the tree in the plaza, came looking for Manderalin. Sir Knight, he said respectfully, the Baron of Vo Ebor hath arrived from the north, accompanied by his lady. They have asked after thee, and besought me that I should seek thee out for them. Thou art most kind, Sir Andorig, Manderalin replied, rising quickly from the bench where he had been sitting. Thy courtesy becomes thee greatly. Andorig sighed. Alas, that it was not always so. I have this past night stood vigil before that miraculous tree which holy Belgarath commended to my care. I thus had leisure to consider my life in retrospect. I have not been an admirable man. Bitterly I repent my faults, and will strive earnestly for amendment. Wordlessly, Manderalin clasped the knight's hand, and then followed him down a long hallway
to a room where the visitors waited. Farmo says, "Apple guy, aw, he's learning." It was not until they entered the sunlit room that Garion remembered that the wife of the Baron of Vo Ebor was the lady to whom Manderalin had spoken on that wind-swept hill beside the Great West Road some days before. The Baron was a solid-looking man in a green surcoat, and his hair and beard were touched with white. His eyes were deep-set, and there seemed to be a great sadness in them.
"Manderalin," he said,
warmly embracing the younger knight,
"thou art unkind to absent thyself from us for so long." "Duty, my lord," Manderalin replied in a subdued voice. "Come, Nerina," the Baron told his wife. "Greet our friend."
The Baroness Nerina was much younger than her husband. Her hair was dark and very long. She wore a rose-colored gown, and she was beautiful, though, Garion thought, no more so than any of a half-dozen others he had seen at the Arendish court. Garion's got a ranking, apparently. "Dear Manderalin," she said, kissing the knight with a brief, chaste embrace, "we have missed thee at Vo Ebor."
"And the world is desolate for me that I must be absent from its well-loved halls."
Farmo says Garion's not thinking about Zubret anymore. Sir Anderig had bowed, and then discreetly departed, leaving Garion standing awkwardly near the door.
"And who is this likely-appearing lad who accompanies thee, my son?" the Baron asked. "A Sandarian boy," Manderalin responded. "His name is Garion. He and divers others have joined with me in a perilous quest." Joyfully I greet my son's companion," the Baron declared.
Garion bowed, but his mind raced, attempting to find some legitimate excuse to leave. The situation was terribly embarrassing, and he did not want to stay.
"I must wait upon the king," the Baron announced. "Custom and courtesy demand that I present myself to him as soon as possible upon my arrival at his court. Wilt thou, Manderalin, remain here with my Baroness until I return?" "I will, my lord." "I'll take you to where the king is meeting with my aunt and my grandfather, sir," Garion offered quickly. "Nay, lad," the Baron demurred. "Thou too must remain, though I have no cause for anxiety, knowing full well the fidelity of my wife and my dearest friend. Idle tongues would make scandal were they left together unattended. Prudent folk leave no possible foundation for false rumor and vile innuendo."
"I'll stay then, sir," Garion replied quickly.
"Good lad,"
the Baron approved. Then, with eyes that seemed somehow haunted, he quietly left the room. What was one of the predictions? Maybe it's not fair, having read the book before, but it is a recurring theme.
"Wilt thou sit, my lady?"
Manderalin asked Nerina, pointing to a sculptured bench near a window.
"I will," she said. "Our journey was fatiguing."
"It is a long way from Vo Ebor," Manderalin agreed, sitting on another bench. "Didst thou and my lord find the roads passable?" Sharky say, "I trust them, but maybe stay here with them. Let's not let other people gossip." And Farmo says, "Garion's stuck somewhere listening to an awkward conversation."
Didst thou and my lord find the roads passable?
Perhaps not yet so dry as to make travel enjoyable, she told him. They spoke at some length about roads and weather, sitting not far from each other, but not so close that anyone chancing to pass by the open door could have mistaken their conversation for anything less than innocent. Their eyes, however, spoke more intimately. Geryon, painfully embarrassed, stood looking out a window, carefully choosing one that kept him in full view of the door. As the conversation progressed, there were increasingly long pauses, and Geryon cringed inwardly at each agonizing silence, afraid that either Mandoralin or the Lady Nerina might, in the extremity of their hopeless love, cross that unspoken boundary and blurt the one word, phrase, or sentence which would cause restraint and honor to crumble and turn their lives into disaster. And yet, a certain part of his mind wished that the word or phrase or sentence might be spoken, and that their love could flame, however briefly. It was there, in that quiet, sunlit chamber, that Geryon passed a small crossroad. The prejudice against Mandoralin that Leldoran's unthinking partisanship had instilled in him finally shattered and fell away. He felt a surge of feeling, not pity, for they would not have accepted pity, but compassion, rather. More than that, there was the faint beginning of an understanding of the honor and towering pride which, though utterly selfless, was the foundation of that tragedy which had existed in Erendia for uncounted centuries. For perhaps a half-hour more, Mandoralin and the Lady Nerina sat, speaking hardly at all now, their eyes lost in each other's faces, while Geryon, near to tears, stood his enforced watch over them. And then Dernick came to tell them that Aunt Pole and Mr. Wolf were getting ready to leave. And that's the end of Chapter 11, and also the end of Part 1. Ba-ba! Part 2! Tolnedra! It's not even 8 o'clock yet. Farmo says, can't tell if the Baron is being kind or cruel there. I don't think that the Baron is intending on cruelty. Whether or not that, depending on the end result, is something different. But I think that his intentions are kind. I just noticed the map of Tolnedra is, I just tore the cover a little bit, is upside down compared to the map of Erendia. The map of Erendia this way is right side up, but this way in Tolnedra is upside down. It's a little weird. Yeah, so we've reached chapter 12 on page 141 and part 2. Farmo says I could see it being either like, let's let them have some time together, or let's tempt them and maybe they'll get over it and then get it over with, and then we can all get this over with. Except that he talked to Geryon and said, you need to stay here. So I don't think that second part holds up. Chapter 12 is only like 7 pages long, so what do you think? Should we just get through the first chapter of part 2? It's definitely a shorter chapter. It goes from 141 to midway through 148. Turkey say yes. Alright, let's do it. So, our map of Tolnedra, let's get a look at that. There we go. That's a nice shot. Look at that. We've got Arendia up here, Algaria over here. The Great Western Sea down this side. You'll notice some different naming conventions. So you can see Vo up at the top of the map. And then there's a bit of a forest, it looks like, with some places that are kind of difficult to make out the names of. Corin and Zid and Torim. Then you get out of the forest and you see Minton and Dim and Draur or something. This map's, for some reason, a little bit tougher to read the names of some of the things for me. There's also a lot of mountains in Tolnedra, it looks like. Oh, and there's also a border in the mountainous area with Tholmergos, as well as the South Caravan Road, which leads from Tol Honeth. I believe Tol Honeth is the capital, sort of lower, like right here, Tol Honeth. There's a road that goes this way all the way to Tholmergos. And then south of Tolnedra is Nyissa down here. The border is right about here. But yes, I believe the capital of Tolnedra, I believe, is Tol Honeth. And as has been mentioned before, Tolnedra is an empire, not a kingdom. Imperial Tolnedra. Alright, Chapter 12. A brassy chorus of horns saluted them from the battlements of Vo Farmo says, and they're the ones who patrol the roads. Yeah, we are told that they love treaties and things like that. You get a bit of I get a bit of like a Roman vibe from them, like the Roman Empire. A little bit. A brassy chorus of horns saluted them from the battlements of Vo as they rode out of the city, accompanied by 20 armored knights, and by King Corodulin himself. Garion glanced back once, and thought he saw the Lady Nerina standing upon the wall above the arched gate, though he could not be sure. The lady did not wave, and Mandaralin did not look back. Garion, however, very nearly held his breath until Vo was out of sight. We really just kind of got the castle of Vo We didn't really get to see any of the daily life of people in Vo itself. We saw more of that in the rest of Erendia, serfs and things in their villages, and Count Reldigan's home. But we didn't really get much of Vo itself, unlike Sendaria and Cherek. Farmo says Garion ships them, but is also worried about it. It was mid-afternoon by the time they reached the ford which crossed the river Erend into Tolnedra. Yeah, so it's just an afternoon's ride from the capital of Erendia to Tolnedra. It's strange how close those are to me. You'd think a capital would be more central and further from borders. It was mid-afternoon by the time they reached the ford which crossed the river Erend into Tolnedra, and the bright sun sparkled on the river. Farmo says our capital is on an island. Our capital, a weird thing with Canada is most of the population of Canada, I think, is pretty close to the southern border, but that's also because the further north you go, the harder it is to live, easily and comfortably due to extreme weather. The further away from the border you go, the further from the equator you're going as well. And mountains. And rocky bits. The sky was very blue overhead, and the colored pennons on the lances of the escorting knights snapped in the breeze. Garion felt a desperate urgency, an almost unbearable necessity, to cross the river and leave Erendia and the terrible things that had happened there behind. "Hail and farewell, holy Belgarath," Corodulan said at the water's edge. "I will, as thou hast advised me, begin my preparations. Erendia will be ready. I pledge my life to it." Yep, there it is. Sharky's singing some arrogant worms. I knew that was coming as soon as Farmo said the part about rocky bits. I pledge my life to it.
"And I'll keep you advised of our progress from time to time," Mr. Wolf said.
"I will also examine the activities of the Murgos within my kingdom," Corodulan said. "If what thou hast told me should prove true, as I doubt not that it shall, then I will expel them from Erendia. I will seek them out, one and all, and harry them out of the land. I will make their lives a burden and an affliction to them for sowing discord and contention among my subjects." Wolf grinned at him.
"That's an idea that appeals to me. Murgos are an arrogant people, and a little affliction now and then teaches them humility."
He reached out and took the king's hand.
"Goodbye, Corodulan. I hope the world's happier next time we meet."
"I pray that it may be so," the young king said. Then Mr. Wolf led the way down into the rippling water of the shallow ford. Beyond the river, Imperial Tolnedra waited, and from the banks behind them, the Membrate Knights saluted with a great fanfare on their horns. As they emerged on the far side of the river, Garion looked around, trying to see some difference in terrain or foliage which might distinguish Erendia from Tolnedra. But there seemed to be none. The land, indifferent to human boundaries, flowed on unchanged. About a half-mile from the river, they entered the forest of Vordu, an extensive tract of well-kept woodland which extended from the sea to the foothills of the mountains to the east. Once they were under the trees, they stopped and changed back into their traveling clothes.
"I think that we might as well keep the guise of merchants,"
Mr. Wolf said, settling with obvious comfort back into his patched, rust-colored tunic and mismatched shoes. I forgot about the mismatched shoes. Those have been mentioned before, but I think it's been quite a while.
"It won't fool the Grolims, of course, but it will satisfy the Tolnedrans we meet along the way. We can deal with the Grolims in other ways." "Are there any signs of the orb about?"
Barak rumbled as he stowed his bearskin cloak and helmet in one of the packs.
"A hint or two,"
Wolf said, looking around.
"I'd guess that Zadar went through here a few weeks ago."
"We don't seem to be gaining on him much," Silk said, pulling on his leather vest.
"We're holding our own, at least. Shall we go?"
They remounted and continued along the Tolnedran highway, which ran straight through the forest in the afternoon sun. After a league or so, they came to a wide place in the road where a single whitewashed stone building, low and red-roofed, stood solidly at the roadside. Several soldiers lounged indolently about, but their armor and equipment seemed less well cared for than that of the legionnaires Garion had seen before. "Customs station," Silk said. "Tolnedrans like to put them far enough from the border so that they don't interfere with legitimate smuggling."
"Those are very slovenly legionnaires," Dernick said disapprovingly.
"They aren't legionnaires," Silk explained. "They're soldiers of the customs service, local troops. There's a great difference."
"I can see that," Dernick said.
A soldier wearing a rusty breastplate and carrying a short spear stepped into the road and held up his hand.
"Customs inspection," he announced in a bored tone. "His Excellency will be with you in a moment or two. You can take your horses over there."
He pointed to a kind of yard at the side of the building. Sharky say reminds me of Ankh-Morpork with its legal thievery. Farmos agrees.
"Is trouble likely?" Mandaralan asked.
The knight had removed his armor and now wore the mail suit and surcoat in which he customarily traveled. "No," Silk said. "The customs agent will ask a few questions, and then we'll bribe him and be on our way."
"Bribe?"
Dernick asked. Silk shrugged. "Of course. That's the way things are in Tolnedra. Better let me do the talking. I've been through all this before." Yep. The customs agent, a stout, balding man in a belted gown of a rusty brown color, came out of the stone building, brushing crumbs from the front of his clothes.
Good afternoon,"
he said in a businesslike manner, fumbling a little bit. "Good day, Your Excellency," Silk replied with a brief bow.
"And what have we here?"
the agent asked, looking appraisingly at the packs. Farmo says going through customs/border crossing is always a weird experience. Yeah, you always feel like, I need to prove I'm not guilty. "I'm Radek of Boktor," Silk replied, "a Drasnian merchant. I'm taking Sendarian wool to Talhoneth." He opened the top of one of the packs and pulled out a corner of woven gray cloth.
"Your prospects are good, worthy merchant,"
the customs agent said, fingering the cloth.
"It's been a chilly winter this year, and wool's bringing a good price."
There was a brief clinking sound as several coins changed hands. The customs agent smiled then, and his manner grew more relaxed.
"I don't think we'll need to open all the packs," he said. "You're obviously an honorable man, worthy Radek, and I wouldn't want to delay you."
Silk bowed again. "Is there anything I should know about the road ahead, Your Excellency?" he asked, tying up the pack again. "I've learned to rely on the advice of the customs service."
"The road's good," the agent said with a shrug. "The Legion see to that."
"Of course. Any unusual conditions anywhere?"
"It might be wise if you kept somewhat to yourselves on your way south," the stout man advised. "There's a certain amount of political turmoil in Tolnedra just now. I'm sure, though, that if you show that you're tending strictly to business, you won't be bothered."
"Turmoil?" Silk asked, sounding a bit concerned. "I hadn't heard about that."
"It's the succession. Things are a bit stirred up at the moment."
"Is Ranboroon ill?" Silk asked with surprise.
No, the stout man said. Only old. It's a disease no one recovers from. Since he doesn't have a son to succeed him, the Borun dynasty hangs on his feeblest breath. The great families are already maneuvering for position. It's all terribly expensive, of course, and we Tolnedrans get agitated when there's money involved. Silk laughed briefly. Don't we all? Perhaps it might be to my advantage to make a few contacts in the right quarters. Which family would you guess is in the best position at the moment? I think we have the edge over the rest of them, the agent said, rather smugly. We? The Vorduvians. I'm distantly related on my mother's side to the family. The Grand Duke Cador of Tol Vordeus, the only logical choice for the throne. I don't believe I know him, Silk said. An excellent man, the agent said expansively. A man of force and vigor and foresight. If the selection were based on simple merit, Grand Duke Cador would be given the throne by general consent. Unfortunately, though, the selection's in the hands of the Council of Advisors. Ah! Indeed, the agent agreed bitterly. You wouldn't believe the size of the bribes some of those men are asking for their votes, worthy Radek. It's an opportunity that comes only once in a lifetime, I suppose, Silk said. I don't begrudge any man the right to a decent, reasonable bribe, the stout agent complained. But some of the men on the council have gone mad with greed. No matter what position I get in the new government, it's going to take me years to recoup what I've already been obliged to contribute. It's the same all over Tolnedra. Decent men are being driven to the wall by taxes and all these emergency subscriptions. You don't dare let a list go by that doesn't have your name on it, and there's a new list out every day. The expense is making everyone desperate. They're killing each other in the streets of Tolhoneth. That bad? Silk asked. Farmouse says, this definitely seems Ankh-Morporkian. Yeah. Tolnedran politics are interesting. Sharky say, like, one has to ante up to stay in the game. Worse than you can imagine, the customs man said. The Horbites don't have the kind of money it takes to conduct a political campaign, so they've started to poison off council members. We spend millions to buy a vote, and the next day our man turns black in the face and falls over dead. Then we have to raise more millions to buy up his successor. They're absolutely destroying me. I don't have the right kind of nerves for politics. Terrible, Silk sympathized. If Ranborun would only die, the Tolnedran complained desperately. We're in control now, but the Honeths are richer than we are. If they unite behind one candidate, they'll be able to buy the throne right out from under us. And all the while Ranborun sits in the palace, doting on that little monster he calls a daughter, and with so many guards around that we can't persuade even the bravest assassin to make an attempt on him. Sometimes I think he intends to live forever. I feel like every sentence that passes, it gets more and more like Ankh-Morpork. Patience, Excellency, Silk advised. The more we suffer, the greater the rewards in the end. The Tolnedran sighed. I'll be very rich someday then. But I've kept you long enough, worthy Radek. I wish you good speed and cold weather in Tolhoneth to bring up the price of your wool. Silk bowed formally, remounted his horse, and led the party a trot away from the customs station. It's good to be back in Tolnedra again, the weasel-faced little man said expansively once they were out of earshot. I love the smell of deceit, corruption, and intrigue.
You're a bad man, Silk,
Barak said.
This place is a cesspool.
Of course it is, Silk laughed. But it isn't dull, Barak. Tolnedra's never dull. They approached a tidy Tolnedran village as evening fell and stopped for the night in a solid, well-kept inn where the food was good and the beds were clean. They were up early the next morning. After breakfast, they clattered out of the inn-yard and onto the cobblestoned street in that curious silver light that comes just before the sun rises. "A proper sort of place," Dernick said approvingly, looking around at the white stone houses with their red-tiled roofs. "Everything seems neat and orderly."
"It's a reflection of the Tolnedran mind," Wolf explained. "They pay great attention to details."
"That's not an unseemly trait," Dernick observed. Wolf was about to answer that when two brown-robed men ran out of a shadowy side street.
"Look out!" the one in the rear yelled. "He's gone mad!"
The man running in front was clutching at his head, his face contorted into an expression of unspeakable horror. Garion's horse shied violently as the madman ran directly at him, and Garion raised his right hand to try to push the bulging-eyed lunatic away. At the instant his hand touched the man's forehead, he felt a surge in his hand and arm, a kind of tingling, as if the arm were suddenly enormously strong, and his mind filled with a vast roaring. The madman's eyes went blank, and he collapsed on the cobblestones as if Garion's touch had been some colossal blow. Then Barak nudged his horse between Garion and the fallen man.
"What's this all about?"
he demanded of the second-robed man, who ran up, gasping for breath. "We're from Mar Terrin," the man answered. "Brother Ebor couldn't stand the ghosts anymore, so I was given permission to bring him home until his sanity returned." He knelt over the fallen man. "You didn't have to hit him so hard," he accused. "I didn't," Garion protested. "I only touched him. I think he fainted." "You must have hit him," the monk said. "Look at the mark on his face." An ugly red welt stood on the unconscious man's forehead. "Garion," Aunt Pole said, "can you do exactly what I tell you to do without asking any questions?" Garion nodded. "I think so." "Get down off your horse. Go to the man on the ground and put the palm of your hand on his forehead. Then apologize to him for knocking him down."
"Are you sure it's safe, Polgara?"
Barak asked. "It will be all right. Do as I told you, Garion." Garion hesitantly approached the stricken man, reached out, and laid his palm on the ugly welt. "I'm sorry," he said, "and I hope you get well soon." There was a surge in his arm again, but quite different from the first one. The madman's eyes cleared, and he blinked. "Where am I?" he asked. "What happened?" His voice sounded very normal, and the welt on his forehead was gone. "It's all right now," Garion told him, not knowing exactly why he said it. "You've been sick, but you're better now." "Come along, Garion," Aunt Pole said. "His friend can care for him now." Garion went back to his horse, his thoughts churning. "A miracle!" the second monk exclaimed. "Hardly that," Aunt Pole said. "The blow restored your friend's mind, that's all. It happens sometimes." But she and Mr. Wolf exchanged a long glance that said quite plainly that something else had happened. Something unexpected. They rode on, leaving the two monks in the middle of the street. "What happened?" Dernick asked, a stunned look on his face. Mr. Wolf shrugged.
"Polgara had to use Garion," he said. "There wasn't time to do it any other way."
Dernick looked unconvinced.
"We don't do it often," Wolf explained. "It's a little cumbersome to go through someone else like that, but sometimes we don't have any choice.
But Garion healed him, Dernick objected. It has to come from the same hand as the blow, Dernick, Aunt Pole said. Please, don't ask so many questions. The dry awareness in Garion's mind, however, refused to accept any of their explanations. It told him that nothing had come from outside. With a troubled face, he studied the silvery mark on his palm. It seemed different for some reason. Don't think about it, dear, Aunt Pole said quietly as they left the village and rode south along the highway. It's nothing to worry about. I'll explain it all later. Then, to the caroling of birds that greeted the rising sun, she reached across and firmly closed his hand with her fingers. And that's chapter 12. Interesting. Very interesting. So I feel like we learned a little bit about Tolnedran society there from that customs agent. It definitely there are definite similarities to Ankh-Morpork society. Just the practical view of bribery and people poisoning each other, and we can't even send an assassin because the security's too tight. Pharma says, getting what you mean about the Roman thing. The families jockeying for position. And the the legionnaires, right? Legionnaire is a very Roman thing. I think that immediately raises similar comparisons. Pharma says, and then assassinations and politics and councils and things, yeah. Oh boy. And then the monks from Mar Terrin, the one that couldn't deal with the ghosts anymore. Pretty intriguing. What's going on with Garion, I wonder? Well, interesting few chapters. Mandaralin and the Lady Narina of Vo Ebor. So, what does everyone think? Are you excited to be out of Arendia? Arendia was interesting, but I feel like it was a little tedious at times. I don't know. I'm looking forward to Tolnedra. I like Arendia, but I think you quickly grasp the way that things are in Arendia. Sharky say Arendia was sad. Yeah. You quickly get a grasp of the way that things are there, and then once you've got that, I feel like there's not too much to surprise you after that. Versus, I feel like we have some surface level knowledge of Tolnedra, but I think the first chapter there, that conversation with the customs agent, suddenly shows you an entirely different side of Tolnedra that we really had not seen in the slightest before. It's like as soon as you cross the border into Tolnedra, because before that, we basically saw Imperial Legionnaires and the highway and the evenly spaced hostels that were uniformly acceptable and expensive. And then, that's all we really knew about Tolnedra.
and then you cross into Tolnedra, and immediately you're like, politics, power struggle, assassinations, poisoning, bribery, um, you know, just like it just gets dropped on you the second you cross the border, and you're not even like, you're barely into Tolnedra. So I think that that's kind of interesting. Like you don't fully know what to expect all of a sudden. Maybe you thought you knew, but you get to that customs agent and you're like, oh, okay. Commerce, as the Sharky said. Maybe a little bit of a Ferengi vibe. Parmo says, Arendia seemed gray, Tolnedra seems greener. Maybe less of a social divide. Well, and the way that that customs agent was talking about things was interesting, right? Like, okay, so Tolnedra is divided into houses, at least 3 great houses. And those houses will reach down even to like people that are only tangentially related. Like, that customs agent was like, my mother is, sort of like distantly related to the Grand Duke Cador's family. The Vor or something? The Veruvians? Or I think it's Veruvians. Vorduvians. I was close. I missed the D. There's a joke there I'm not going to make. Vorduvians. I wonder what distinguishes a Grand Duke from a Duke. Oh boy. I am definitely looking forward to some stuff that's to come. It's a weird thing about rereading books, right? When you know what's going to happen, but you're looking forward to certain things. Like, if you're rereading The Hobbit, you're going to look forward to the riddle scene. You're going to go like, oh, I can't wait to get to the riddle scene. Like, that part's so great. Or you're going to look forward to meeting the dragon. It's sort of strange. Like, you've read it before, you know what's going to happen, but still, it's like, it's not like there's going to be new visuals or anything like that. Nothing's going to change in the words in the book. Farmer says, he wasn't, like, destitute, and the inn they encountered, which presumably had fairly common owners, seemed reasonably well off. Yeah, it seemed like what we have seen so far, people are living relatively comfortably and orderly. Dernick approved. And Sharky say, at least if you buy your way into the right position and you're lucky enough to have backed the right horse, you can improve your station. Farmer says, every new scene in The Hobbit was like, oh yeah, this scene. Sharky say, whereas the serfdom in Arendia keeps the class system firm through generations. Yeah. Yeah, Arendia was definitely, there was a divide from nobles, common folk, serfs. We didn't really see common folk very much. We caught a glimpse of them in Vo Mimbre, right? Like, they live in a city, they're not serfs. The serfs were definitely like a step down further. But yeah, there was that divide of nobility versus everyone else. And as far as we're aware, we have not yet encountered anything quite like that in Tolnedra. Sharky saying, reading through the first few chapters of Lord of the Rings, we're like, oh, Sam! I read a little thing today that was talking about how Tolkien received a letter in the 50s from someone whose name was Sam Gamgee, who had not read the books, but had been told that his name was in them. And so Tolkien sent him back a letter saying basically, like, you know, I hope that it is some relief to you to know that the character of Sam Gamgee in these books is very heroic and has become much beloved by everybody who has read the books. But then in like a journal or something like that, or a letter to someone else, he was recounting this exchange and saying that he lived in fear of receiving a letter someday from an S-golem, and saying that that would be much more difficult to deal with. So I thought that was entertaining. All right. Well, it's nearly 8:40. I need to eat some food. I've got a couple other things to do, so I'm going to wrap things up. This was fun. I'm happy that we have wrapped things up in Arendia. Not to be too harsh on Arendia, but clearly there's issues there, and it wasn't necessarily always the most fun place to be. There were some interesting events there, but Arendia itself, I'm not disappointed to leave it behind. So, look forward to next Wednesday and further adventures in Tolnedra. I'm going to look forward to that. All right. Well, have a good weekend. Good luck with reading Lord of the Rings. I hope that that is entertaining. You'll have to tell me more about how that goes. Anything notable. And happy Friday and have a great weekend. Yes. Thank you. And yeah. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Good night. See ya.